Let's talk about Kundalini Shakti. Kundalini Shakti, what it is and what it isn't. First, as much as you can as you're receiving this, as you're listening to this, let yourself be in a space of receptivity, energetic receptivity. Because after all, since we're talking about the Kundalini Shakti, then there's an opportunity to experience it too. And we experience it, sometimes we can experience it even if we're not receptive. If it's so strong, it overwhelms us. But it's a subtle energy. It's subtler than the sound of my voice coming through your device. It's subtler than the sensations in your physical body. So we have to get a little bit receptive. I'll talk about what it's not in a second. But first, let me just define it a little bit. Kundalini Shakti. Shakti just means power. It just means energy. Oftentimes when we use the word Shakti, it has a divine connotation. It has a sacred connotation in Sanskrit. It just means power. And then there are all these different kinds of power. Matruka Shakti, the power of language. Jnana Shakti, the power of knowledge. Icha Shakti, the power of will. So Kundalini Shakti literally means the power that is coiled up. That's what it means literally. Kundalini means coiled up. And the connotation or the image of it is like a snake that is coiled up, a serpent that is coiled up. And what it refers to is it's a universal power, first of all. It doesn't belong to anyone. It certainly doesn't belong to any company or any like style of yoga or something like that. We're going to talk about that in a moment, very frankly. Kundalini Shakti is the divine energy of creation in a human being, in this form that is both contracted and coiled up and also in dormant and potential. And Kundalini Shakti is also active and expanded and expanding and dynamic. Okay? That's it. Now, over the centuries in India, this term, of course, comes from the Indian mystical tradition. Some of the esoteric yogis were the ones who first started talking about Kundalini Shakti. Then there are different schools of thought about how to work with it. Different schools of thought of how to practice in a way that helps it. Helps it what? Well, helps it to expand. Helps it, first of all, when it's dormant, to go to it being awakened and activated. And then once it's activated, to help it, quote unquote, to do its work of being expanded and its work of helping us ultimately to realize the truth of what we are. I think that that's a good working definition. Now, we can't go any further, and this is such a frustrating thing for me as a teacher in today's world. We can't go any further without talking about what it's not. And so when we say Kundalini Yoga, just means the yoga that works with Kundalini. That's all that term actually means. But like so many other things today, this term has been turned into a brand name. It's been turned into the name of an organization, a company, a brand, a style of yoga, right? Because we study yoga in the contemporary moment within a marketplace, where every style has to be differentiated from the other. And, these things, they really are brand names, like we call ours Big Heart Meditation. And I tried to keep it as general and as positive as possible to avoid this kind of, silliness that happens and confusion for people. Kundalini Yoga is not what I teach in terms of the brand, the style of yoga. And I have really big qualms with it. And so do many, many teachers, especially teachers that are rooted in a classical tradition, especially teachers who are invested in, getting beyond corruption in the yoga world, and especially beyond like the exploitative and harmful things that happen within cults. Trigger warning, I'm going to talk a little bit about cult dynamics, just a little bit. We're mostly going to spend the time talking about Kundalini Shakti, but I have to talk about this because it has to be said. I'm going to talk a little bit about cult dynamics, and those cult dynamics include some sexual violence. No depictions or descriptions of the violence, just that we are going to mention it. Because what we know of is Kundalini Yoga, the white clothes and the white turban and the, Satnam and all that sort of thing. There's music that many of us are familiar with, some, really beautiful music. The popular yoga brand was started by a man who called himself Yogi Bhajan, and who in the past few years, it has been revealed through research and also countless testimonies that he was really a charlatan, like meaning that he, was selling something that wasn't really legit. And a charlatan, as opposed to, sometimes a teacher they're just deluded, They think that they're doing something true, but, for whatever reason, they're deluded and what they're selling is not so true. This is different. A charlatan is someone who knows that they're selling something that's fake. So really briefly, these two main reasons why I have a beef with the Kundalini Yoga thing. 3 things. The first is that it's just the origin of it. It claims to be this ancient method. It's not. It claims to be connected to Sikhism. It's not. The person, I forget his name, before he called himself Yogi Bhajan, but he was Sikh, Punjabi origin, Indian fellow. And so that was his root tradition. He also did study yoga with a yoga master in Delhi or around Delhi, who taught Kriya Yoga, who taught, these different yoga techniques with breath and movement that does work with the Kundalini energy to some extent. We'll get to that. So he studied with that guy, and then the 60s came, and yoga became this really popular thing. So the person who became Yogi Bhajan, he worked in the airport as a customs officer, and he just saw all of these Western hippies, coming through, and that yoga was becoming this big thing. And he had the idea. I'm not going to speak to his motivation, but long story short, he came to the States, he came to Canada, and he started this thing that he called Kundalini Yoga. And he claimed that, this was the Sikh tradition, and that he was initiated into this other tantric tradition, and that he was this great tantric master, and started this thing. And, over the decades, it has grown into a very, very popular, very, very lucrative yoga brand called Kundalini Yoga. So that's one beef, is that it's fake. At least its origin story is fake. The other thing is, the other qualm is that then it has also come out through so much testimony that he was a really, really bad guy. Like not just questionable ethics or something, but he committed like direct sexual violence in really gnarly ways. I'll let you look that up on your own, but not subtle. It wasn't just like he manipulated his students. It was really bad, and there were like deaths involved. There were boarding schools where children were abused. The whole thing has a very, very dark underbelly to it, that whole movement, which is funny because on the surface, it is the purest of the pure, white, sweet, godly kind of a vibe. So that's the second thing. The third thing is just that it's called Kundalini Yoga. And so as a teacher myself who works with Kundalini Shakti and comes from a lineage that is very connected to working with the awakening and the cultivation of Kundalini, I just hate it that now the Kundalini word is associated with that particular scene. Even if the scene wasn't fake and have all of the shadow to it. It's one of the qualms that I have, is just that these general Sanskrit words like Ashtanga or Hatha, they get turned into like style names or brand names, and it's just very, very inaccurate. And it's also unfortunate, this kind of fits into the third category still, because it's so popular and because it's kind of hardcore. I mean, if you practice that style of yoga, you're getting up early in the morning, you're practicing a lot. They have intense like dietary restrictions and all these other things. It's very, very intense. I like intense. But the thing is like nowadays, if someone wants to get into yoga, but they don't want it to just be a physical thing, but they want it to be a spiritual thing, and they want it to be kind of hardcore, that's the thing that they will gravitate toward, and they don't know anything about its history. A lot of the people who teach it don't really know anything about its history. We live in such a fast, forgetful culture now, that, a lot of really, I know so many great people, dear people, teacher friends of mine that have made whole careers teaching this Kundalini yoga thing. They are very sincere, but it's connected to this thing that is not so sincere. And so I have a beef with it because like I really try to hold space for the sincere and hardcore seekers. Somebody is asking me thank you for the donation. Did I ever practice that Kundalini yoga? No, I was never affiliated with it. So it's not like I was a part of it and now I'm like exiled from it. I'm going to leave that section of the talk there. Let's talk about what it is. So the Kundalini Shakti is something that lives in human beings in a dormant state. Most people, for most of our lifetimes, we have the Kundalini Shakti, but it's dormant. Again, symbolized by the coiled up snake, and in using the yogic esoteric topography of the subtle body, it's said that coiled up energy lives in the root chakra and the Muladhara chakra, and then at some point it wakes up. While it's asleep, it makes our whole body function, like our brain, our mind, our incredible mind. I'm not even talking about spiritual mind, just ordinary, unspiritual. It's a miracle, the mind. The body and all of its functions. I mean, if you just think about all the countless billions of things that are happening all the time in the body, Kundalini Shakti powers all of that. It is our power source. and in intelligence. It's the body's intelligence for all of those things in a dormant form, okay? When she is awakened, and she is talked about as a she, as a divine feminine energy, when she is awakened, then as she expands, she turns into a spiritual intelligence. So our mind is not just able to understand the world and understand things of the outside, but now the mind is able to perceive things on the inside. Now the mind, the inner sense, is able to directly sense divine energy as opposed to just believing in it. The dormant Kundalini mind can follow a religion, no problem. Because it's just learning. This is God, this is the Trinity, this is the Quran, this is the Buddhism, this is the whatever the religion is. The mind can just learn that. It doesn't have to experience anything. When Kundalini awakens, then we directly experience God, both in the ultimate universal sense, but also in the personal yogic sense, as in the form of God within. First, like we wake up in the morning, kind of a little, we're not totally awake. We're rubbing our eyes. We're looking for our coffee. We're kind of awake. And then by the time we're into the flow of our day, we're fully awake. In the same way, Kundalini awakens at first. And then as it unfolds, it goes from an initial experience of that divine energy into a total establishment in the divine energy. What is called, depending on the tradition, moksha, liberation, enlightenment, freedom, liberation, realization, Buddha nature, stabilized awakening, abiding awakening, sometimes it's called, when the Kundalini is fully expanded. How does it awaken? Now we get into the Kundalini Yoga, the actual Kundalini Yoga. Because in the tradition that I come from, Kundalini is an internal thing, and it is awakened through the power of grace. When Kundalini awakens, it is 100% between you and spirit. Right? So the way that the tantric scriptures talk about it is that at some point, depending on different conditions, shaktipat happens. Shaktipat is literally means like the descent of grace. But shaktipat, the Kundalini is awakened in us, and then it unfolds, and then the yoga that we do, meditation, asana practice, mantra, observances of diet and behavior, the learning of, jnana yoga, like learning of teachings, and bhakti yoga, practicing devotion. All of these practices, once Kundalini is awakened, they're enlivened, so we experience their power directly. Again, we're not just believing in it. Yoga practice can be a total religion too. We don't necessarily experience anything much. So the practices become enlivened and awakened. But also those practices are there to cultivate mind, body, and life in such a way that it can sustain a state of awakened consciousness. So that's what Kundalini Yoga is from my tradition. In other traditions, there are different practices and kriyas, as they're called. Kriya just means action. Different practices that kind of jumpstart that energy awake. Breathing exercises combined with physical asanas, sometimes mantra practices, Sometimes plant medicine. Plant medicine from a Kundalini point of view, that's what's happening. You take the plant medicine and it jump starts it. It wakes it up. From the Tantra point of view, there's a destiny thing here. There's a destiny of souls thing here. And that it only wakes up when it's ready to wake up. When it's ready to commence the process of sadhana. The process of becoming an awakened being. That's when the Kundalini awakens, because that's what her job is. Now, these other things, be they breath exercises or, taking drug or taking, plant medicine, whatever, those things, from the Tantra point of view, might be prematurely waking it up. Waking it up before it's ready to wake up. So, no big deal. What happens? In the night, there's lightning, thunder, boom, we wake up. We're not ready to wake up yet. What happens? We go back to sleep. No problem. And that happens, right? I mean, think about it. So oftentimes people will have an aha, they will have a spiritual experience, they'll have a plant medicine experience, they'll have even sometimes a traumatic experience can be that thing. But if it's not ready for that process to commence, it'll go back to sleep. If it's ready for that process to commence, then that process of unfolding of sadhana commences, and then it's a really good time to have a teacher. It's a really good time to be within a community, because it's a powerful energy, and it goes through this purification process. We'll get to that in a second, that you need support with. So here's the thing about some of these practices, like we were talking about, the 3HO thing, is that if we force it open, like in a good way to force it open is to fast or just eat like plant-based or raw, that was a thing. I don't know if people still do that so much, like raw food diet, and then do like hours and hours of this intense practice, especially with the breath and everything. You can get that energy revved up. Again, if you're not ready to awaken, then it just goes back to sleep. But what happens is, in those kind of situations, and really it's a cult kind of a dynamic, is then before it can go back to sleep again, you have to practice again. And practice again. And get even more hardcore in your thing. And then you change your name. Right? And then you practice again. And then you stop wearing any other color besides white. And then you practice again. And then you make your diet even more intense and you start doing a cleanse. And then you practice again. And it's like keeping that energy awake when really it wants to go back to sleep. And what happens is, you see with people that do those kind of practices, usually, they do have some sort of an altered state while they're in the midst of their work with the practice. But if they stop doing the practice, or they stop doing some of the observances, the effect goes away too, very quickly. In my experience as a teacher, watching people. So they keep it awake, What happens to an ordinary person's body? Have you ever had this? Where you just like get into sleep deprivation? You can go crazy. It can be very, very bad for you. Kundalini sleep deprivation is a thing too. If it wants to sleep, let it sleep. When we keep it awake, we force it awake. It's not what it's a very natural process. It's a thing of nature. And so it has its own seasons to it. In the tradition that I come from, it doesn't want to be messed with. In fact, if you mess with it, it's going to mess back. It's going to mess with you, mess up your life. If we're awakening these energies, and I was using the example of doing it through practice. The other way that people do it is through plant medicine or drugs. Now we call drugs plant medicine, but it's like in traditional shamanic situations, the shaman would take plant medicine. The person would go to a shaman. The shaman would take the plant medicine and have a vision and a blessing to report back to the person. Now it's a thing when people do the shaman thing, they go and take the plant medicine themselves. Not once and have this breakthrough and change their life, but over and over again. And pretty soon they're doing it as often as they can. Why? I think it's because of this thing. I think it's because of this thing where it wants to go back to sleep. And unless we kind of force it open, it will go back to sleep naturally, as it kind of should. Plant medicine can include, the big ones that people are into now are like the ayahuasca and San Pedro and stuff like that. But, it can also just be cannabis. Cannabis is a hallucinogen, and especially the cannabis that is around today. It's very, very potent, and oftentimes can have that experience. MDMA, so many things. And yes, it can cause, depressive states. It can cause manic states. And coming back to the cult thing, it just can aid to the thing where people are deluded and susceptible to being gaslit, susceptible to, being told, well, no, that wasn't sexual violence. You were, the teacher was blessing you or something. But in those states, it's very easy to be deluded like that. As opposed to, as Kundalini awakens in a natural way through grace, we get smarter. We get sharper. One of the qualities that we have is called viveka. Viveka and vairagya. Those are the two V's. Viveka, vairagya. Vairagya means like detachment. It means like understanding that what we want, what we think we want is maybe not what we actually want. There's detachment. Where we're like more easily contented, not so hung up on what's happening outside of us. Detachment is vairagya. Viveka, the other one that I was saying, that means discrimination. It means being sharp, being able to tell what's going on. In fact, as Kundalini awakens, that Kundalini energy helps you to be able to read people accurately. I don't mean this kind of sloppy empath thing where we just get dysregulated when we're around dysregulated people. I mean, you're able to, I'm not talking about reading minds here, but I'm saying that when you're in someone's presence, you can read a lot more off of them than what they're expressing. It makes us sharper in a certain way, as opposed to less deluded. To talk about the awakening of Kundalini and Shaktipat, there are also traditions, including the one that I come from, where that process is very connected to gurus, to the master, and they'll even say that the master gave me Shaktipat. Traditionally, that's not the way that it's talked about. In the tantric scriptures, it's not that the guru gives you Shaktipat. Shaktipat is again, it's between you and grace. It's between you and God. Sometimes the vehicle for that to happen might be a master. Sometimes our Kundalini is awakened when we're hanging out with someone who has very awakened Kundalini energy. It's very contagious, in other words. Environments can become charged with that awakened Kundalini energy, and by being in that environment, it's like that. People oftentimes will experience this when they come to India with us. And, the whole time, we're practicing in this context, and we're going to these ancient sacred places that are very charged, and oftentimes that kind of opening, that kind of awakening will happen for people. Just people that we're working together, in private training, or they come to a class, even in something like this, if we're sensitive. Because that energy is awakened in me, then as you connect to my energy, then that energy can awaken in you. But again, the marketplace, right? So yeah, sign me up. I want that. Well, you can't sign up for it. But a lot of gurus will say that you can. They'll say, yeah, pay this amount and then come to this program and I'll give you shaktipat, or I'll give you initiation. Okay, so a teacher can give you initiation, but that doesn't mean shaktipat, actually. There's this, I'm geeking out here a little bit, and you probably don't even care. But just to finish my own mental loop, there's something in the Tantric scriptures that says that shaktipat alone is initiation. What it's saying is that is the true initiation. The true initiation is when the Kundalini awakens. But that's been kind of mixed up and conflated a little bit. And then now we have this thing of, because teachers in India give initiation, like they give you a mantra. I'm doing this initiation program into a text called the Shiva Sutra right now. But then it gets conflated into this shaktipat diksha. Like, I will give you shaktipat initiation. And in the scriptures, it doesn't work that way. I mean, that can happen during an initiation, but it's not something that you can sign up for. It's something that is so supremely beautiful and free and not hung up in all of that kind of conditional thing. Because the tricky thing is if you feel like someone gave you this, then it could also mean that it's taken away. A little bit more of this information. I hope that this is interesting. According to the scriptures, there are 3 levels of shaktipat, 3 levels of this initial awakening. The first level is intense shaktipat, it's called. Intense shaktipat happens to someone. Their Kundalini is awakened. They are completely enlightened in that moment, completely awakened, totally expanded, totally one with God in that moment. And they drop their body. They die in that moment. That's intense shaktipat, it's called. Kundalini awakens, complete realization is there, and all karma in that lifetime done. That's intense shaktipat, according to the scriptures. The next level, the middle level, is called medium. Medium level shaktipat means Kundalini awakens and we are completely enlightened in that moment. In that moment, the Kundalini awakens, everything is just finished in terms of our spiritual evolution, and we're completely one with God. And then our body doesn't die in medium shaktipat. It lives on as long as the body has karma, but we live in an fully awakened state from that point on. And there are stories like that. There are stories of people having these like spontaneous enlightenments and spontaneous awakenings, and Some of them I think are bullshit, quite frankly. Some of them I think are like really sexy, origin stories for people that are trying to sell their book or sell their thing or whatever. And I think that some of them are legitimate. They're rare, The other one, we don't know because they die. Who knows? But like somebody just drops dead, from a heart attack or a stroke or something, whatever reason. There must be some medical reason why it happens. Who knows? Maybe they were having intense shaktipat. Medium shaktipat, there are some cases, but it's very rare. All of the rest of us have mild shaktipat. And mild shaktipat happens where there's an initial awakening and then a process of evolution before the complete realization is there. A process of evolution before the complete realization is there. Oftentimes, in the initial moment of awakening, there is a mystical experience. Not always, but oftentimes, people will have a mystical experience. In Buddhism, it is called satori, or a pre-taste. A pre-taste of enlightenment, a pre-taste of awakening. So somebody will have this initial awakening and they will experience themselves being one with the universe. So they'll experience their energy blasting through them in a tremendous way. I mean, there is also, besides the foretaste thing, there's a lot of pent-up energy there. So when it erupts, it can be an eruption of experience. There's all kinds of things that can happen. People will do spontaneous yoga postures. They say that that's where the yoga postures came from. Some people believe that initially they happened spontaneously through Kundalini, and then we paid attention to which ones kept happening, and then we started practicing them on our own, Mudras, hand mudras, but also there's mudras with the tongue and the eyes and all of these other bandhas and things that we learn in Hatha Yoga. Sometimes those will happen spontaneously as the Kundalini awakens. Sounds will come out, Can happen in a dream and these mystical kind of dreams that happen. But generally what will happen is after that initial mystical experience, it assimilates, and then there's a process where we have to then cultivate it. And it's like a fire has been lit, right? Something has been kindled, but we have to, through our practice, kind of not keep it awake like I was talking about before, but we just have to like keep it going. It won't completely go out. Once it's awakened, it won't completely go out. And what they say is that like three lifetimes maximum, I've heard. I mean, who knows? This is what the scriptures say. I don't know. 3 lifetimes, but that you can complete a lifetime without becoming enlightened after Shaktipat. And then you're born the next life it's like with a hot coal. There's a hot coal that we're born with. And then in that lifetime, you'll find your way into some kind of yoga that then ignites that coal back into a flame again. This is the case with many of us, I believe, in this contemporary culture. I don't know about you, but I'm quite certain that my initial Shaktipat was not in this lifetime. It must have been in a past lifetime. How many? I don't know. But I've never not felt a little bit awake, even when I was a kid. But also, when I had my initial kind of blowing the flames, blowing the coal back into a flame, it was never like one of these huge, wild, explosive experiences that people will describe sometimes. For me, it was more subtle, but much deeper, and obviously has led to a lifetime of doing this work. But it's like what they say is once that fire is kindled, once the Kundalini is awakened, it doesn't go completely back to sleep. Once it's awakened in that in that natural way. But it can get very, very quiet. You stop practicing, you eat badly, you just stop paying attention to your spiritual life. You can definitely spend the rest of your life in a relatively ordinary way. But that is still there. When that is awakened, then, any practice that you do, you can sense it. And you can also tend to sense what's valid and what's not so valid. Like if you ever had this thing where you're like listening to some spiritual teachings, like, I don't know, maybe even this, but like you're listening to somebody talk about the Bible, or you're listening to somebody talk about some other thing. And there's part of you that's like, yeah, that part is true. This other part, I don't know. And it's not just that it doesn't agree with us, or that it intellectually doesn't, it's that inner energy that's awakened us, that is the greatest, most wisest, most powerful teacher that we can ever have. Oftentimes, the inner awakened Shakti is talked about as the guru, as the inner guru. Let's do a little practice. How do we practice so that the Kundalini can awaken through grace? Like this. Make yourselves comfortable wherever you are. Make sure your body is very cozy and also kind of loose and free, especially your spine. I know you want more instructions. I'm not going to give you more instructions in this context. There's other contexts where I give lots more instructions. In this context, we'll just say, make your body cozy and keep it free and your spine a little bit loose. Close your eyes if they're open. And focus on the central channel that runs through your body from your head to your pelvis vertically. So the central channel that goes from, it's really the floor of your pelvis, perineum, the floor of your pelvis, all the way up into your head. The crown of your head to the floor of your pelvis. Now, oftentimes we talk about dormant Kundalini living in Muladhara chakra, the root chakra. That's the one that's at the floor of your pelvis. You can bring your attention there. But in Tantra, we also, document that this awakening energy or this kindling of the energy can happen anywhere in the subtle body. And in particular, it tends to happen in one of three places. One is in that Muladhara, in the kind of like down in your pelvis. What I call the lower heart. It's a big energy center down there that can be more or less open, more or less activated. The energy can be more or less flowing there. Lower heart. Middle heart is right in the center of your chest. This is also a place where people will experience this awakening energy to occur. What I call the middle heart. could be open, could be closed, could be activated, could be, very kind of numb or, offline, it feels like. See if you can connect to that. And then the upper heart, which you can imagine it seated in one of two places, either in the space between your eyebrows, the Ajna chakra, the gate. The Ajna means gate. Or in the Sahasrara, the crown chakra. Sometimes the Kundalini will present itself. And you could just breathe consciously, within this context. Like I said, we're not going to do some big practice. We'll find other contexts to do that if you're interested. For sure, we can do that. But just get close. Relax your body. Turn your attention in and just feel in that central channel, like really feel. Get so soft and so receptive that you're tuning in. You could feel the subtlest energy move, but it might not be real subtle either. It might be an intense pulsation, an intense activation. And then what do you do with a fire? You're starting a fire. Wherever the fire is starting, you focus there. And you give it some breath, you give it some attention, and you encourage it to spread. So if it's in the bottom, encourage it to spread upward. If it's in the top, encourage it to spread downward. Kundalini moves up and down, not just up. It's another misconception. Up and down. If it's activating in the center, then encourage it to spread in both directions. And you just make space for it. And if you feel it, really feel it. And if it feels good, you really enjoy it. But you encourage it. Sometimes your body can move a little bit and encourage it. Sometimes the breath can change a little bit and encourage it. It's like you're breathing right into one of those centers. If you're sensitive, you can feel the energy just flowing in this transmission right now, in this class. You can tune into this, just tune into these instructions and you can feel it if you're sensitive. All kinds of things can arise. Some of them are very pleasant, sometimes very unpleasant things can arise too. It's all in there. It's all this beautiful process of unfolding, purifying. You're doing great. A little bit more. A little bit more focus, a little bit more breath, a little bit more encouragement. You're just encouraging it. Okay. And you can deepen your breathing and let your body move. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes come open. And then after this, you can go and move. You can go and dance. You can go and roll around on the floor in your bed. You can sit in meditation and go back into that same method and just go deeper into it. So see how that goes. Thank you for joining me for this today.